Hey there. Welcome to Shadow Archives. Just a heads up, there are a few ads in the first 10 minutes, then it's completely ad-free. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax or drift off to sleep. I hope you'll give this video a chance because I truly believe you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. This is just one story out of many, but it's the one that always comes back to me first. It centers around my Uncle Bob and my Aunt Joan, my mother's brother and sister-in-law. They've always been steady people, practical, grounded, not the type to exaggerate or chase attention, which is part of why what happened in their house has always stuck with me. They have two homes. One is in Maryland, where they've lived for years, and the other is a beach house in Florida. The house in Maryland is the one where most of this happened. Long before my uncle and aunt bought it, it was owned by another couple. The story passed down is that the man was either Indian or Middle Eastern, and that his wife died there. The way it's been told is that she took her own life by hanging. I don't know how accurate every detail is, but what matters is that the people who lived there after believed something stayed behind. For years, strange things happened in that house, especially at night. Almost always around the same time, the front door knocker would suddenly start knocking. Not just once, but 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Loud enough to hear clearly from inside. Someone would get up, heart pounding, open the door, and find no one there. This wasn't a one-time thing. It happened again and again. Inside the house, door handles would jiggle on their own. Drawers would rattle like someone was opening and closing them, even when no one was near. You could be sitting in the living room, perfectly calm, and suddenly hear the unmistakable sound of movement in another room. When you checked, everything would be exactly as you left it. At some point, it stopped being something you brushed off. My Uncle Bob has said that he has seen her, not just a shadow or a feeling, but her, a woman moving through the house. He described her as partly see-through, but still solid enough to make out details. He wasn't the only one. Other relatives saw her too. My Aunt Cindy, my Uncle Russ, even my grandma. Different people, different times, but the descriptions were similar enough to make everyone uncomfortable. The house has a finished basement. There's an extra bedroom down there and plenty of space. During Thanksgiving one year, most of the family stayed over instead of getting hotels. My mom has 6 siblings, so holidays are loud, crowded, and full of people. That year, anyone who didn't get a bed slept in the basement on air mattresses and blow-up mats. I wasn't there that Thanksgiving, and I still wish I had been because what happened has become one of the most talked about stories in the family. Late that night, my Aunt Cindy woke up. She was lying there, half asleep, when she noticed something wrong. In the dim light of the basement, she saw a woman hovering over my Uncle Russ. The woman looked different from a normal person, pale, almost glowing. She was wearing something on her head that looked like a turban. Aunt Cindy froze at first, trying to understand what she was seeing. Then fear kicked in. She sat up and yelled at it, telling it to get away from him. The moment she said that, the thing moved. Not slowly, not drifting. It flew across the room toward her in what she described as an instant, like it didn't have to cross space the way a normal body would. Terrified, but somehow still thinking clearly, my Aunt Cindy challenged it. She said something along the lines of, "If you're actually real, prove it." Immediately, her bed turned freezing cold. Not just cool, but icy, like all the warmth had been pulled out of it at once. She screamed and the thing vanished. The next morning, everyone was shaken. My Uncle Russ said something that made the whole room go quiet. He said he thought he saw someone standing near him during the night. He had assumed it was my Aunt Cindy. maybe with a towel wrapped around her head, since there's a bathroom in the basement. He didn't think much of it at the time. Only later did he realize that what he saw lined up with what she described. Years later, my Uncle Bob told another story that still creeps me out. He said he was sleeping on the couch one night and couldn't find his glasses. He kept asking my Aunt Joan if she had seen them, but she hadn't. Eventually, tired and frustrated, he lay down on the couch and fell asleep. At some point, he felt something wake him up. When he opened his eyes, the woman was standing in front of him. She spoke. She told him that his glasses were on the table. At first, he thought it was his wife. Half asleep, he responded without thinking. Then reality hit him. He looked more closely and realized it wasn't Joan standing there. He asked who she was, confused and scared. The woman repeated herself calmly, telling him again that his glasses were on the table. He described her as see-through but solid, standing there like she belonged. Then she was gone. His glasses were exactly where she said they were. That was about 10 years ago. My Uncle Bob has said that after that night, he never saw her again. He believes she passed on, or maybe lost interest when she realized she wasn't getting reactions anymore. He doesn't talk about it casually. When he tells the story, it's with the seriousness of someone who knows exactly what they saw. What makes all of this harder to dismiss is my grandma. She is deeply religious, a very strict Protestant, the kind of person who believes firmly in God, heaven, and hell, and would never casually accept the idea of ghosts. If anyone were going to deny or explain something away, it would be her, and she saw the woman too. About a year ago, my grandma stayed in the basement bedroom while visiting my Uncle Bob and Aunt Joan. While unpacking her things, she heard the doorknob to the bedroom start to jiggle violently, not a gentle shake, but loud rattling. Like someone was trying to get in. She opened the door, expecting to see someone there, but the hallway was empty. Later that night, she woke up and saw the woman in the corner of the room. She wasn't standing on the floor, she was sitting on a bench that wasn't actually there, a ghostly bench, just as unreal as the woman herself. My grandma didn't scream, she didn't pray out loud. She simply turned over and told the woman to go away. And it did. She said the woman appeared a couple more times during her stay, but never touched her. When it was time for my grandma to leave and head back home, the doorknob to the bedroom started rattling again. This time, my grandma spoke loudly and firmly. She told the woman she was leaving now and that she could have her room back. After that, it stopped. To this day, my grandma hasn't told my Uncle Bob this story. She says she doesn't want to scare him. That alone says a lot. And this is just one story. I haven't even talked about their beach house in Florida, or my mother's home when she lived in Lockport, New York, or my aunt and uncle's house on my dad's side of the family, or my own experiences in our home in Massachusetts, a house my parents were the first owners of, or my cousin's house in New Jersey, which was apparently owned by someone in the mafia. That one is terrifying. Or my grandma's house in Florida, or the story involving a guy my sister dated, or my boyfriend's mother seeing a headless man in New Hampshire. The stories don't stop. They overlap. They echo each other. Different houses, different states, same kinds of experiences, footsteps, voices, figures, objects moving. Yeah, people seeing the same things independently. My family is very religious on both sides. Some people say that makes us more sensitive. Others say it makes us more open to things we don't fully understand. I don't know what the explanation is. I just know these things happened. Not to one person, not once, but over and over across generations. People don't have to believe it. I don't try to convince anyone anymore. But when you grow up surrounded by stories like this, when you hear them from people you trust, people who aren't looking for attention or drama, it changes how you see the world. You stop assuming everything has a neat explanation. You stop laughing so easily when someone says they saw something they can't explain. Because sometimes there really is more going on than we can see. And in my family, whatever it is, it never really leaves. When this happened, I didn't think of it as a ghost story. It was just something weird that happened one day, something that scared us badly enough that we stopped joking about places like that. Only later, after time passed and we talked about it again, did it settle into something darker? Something that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. It started as a normal day with friends. We were bored, young, and looking for something to do that felt a little edgy but still harmless. Someone suggested going to a cemetery, not because we wanted to mess with graves or be disrespectful, but because it was quiet, open, and a little creepy, in that way that makes you laugh when you're with friends. Cemeteries have that strange mix of calm and unease that feels thrilling when you're young and don't yet understand how real fear works. We walked around at first joking, pointing out old headstones, daring each other to go a little farther away from the group. Everything felt light. The sun was still up, and nothing about the place felt threatening yet. Eventually, one of us had the idea to play hide and seek. It sounded stupid and fun at the same time, so of course we agreed. We decided who would seek first, and I ended up being the fourth seeker. By the time it was my turn, the game had already gone on for a bit. The cemetery was bigger than it looked at first, with paths that twisted and sections that felt more isolated the deeper you went. There were also a few small buildings around, structures meant to store coffins or tools, old and worn down, with doors that were sometimes left open. As I started looking, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and nerves. It was still a game, but the quiet of the cemetery made every sound feel louder. Footsteps echoed strangely. The wind moving through trees sounded like whispers if you listened too closely. I found two of my friends pretty quickly. They were hiding behind headstones, not very creatively, laughing when I spotted them. Once I called them out, they ran off to help find the others, leaving me alone again. That's when I decided to check one of the buildings. It was an open structure used for coffins, the kind of place that already feels wrong even before anything happens. The doorway was wide, and inside there were narrow halls formed by storage spaces. The light inside was dimmer, shadows stretching longer than they should. I told myself it was perfect for hiding, which meant one of my friends might be in there. I stepped inside. The air felt different immediately. Cooler, still. The sound of the outside world faded as soon as I crossed the threshold. My footsteps echoed softly, and I remember thinking how quiet it was, like the building swallowed sound. I started walking through the halls, peeking around corners, calling out softly that I was going to find them. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved. It wasn't just a flicker or something in the corner of my eye. It was a clear shadow passing across the opening of a hall, a couple of corridors down from where I was standing. It moved smoothly, like someone walking past. My first thought was simple. That's one of my friends. Without really thinking, I ran toward where I had seen the shadow. My heart was beating faster, partly from running, partly from excitement at finding someone. As I reached the area where the shadow had passed, I looked down the hall, and I saw a figure. It was standing there, far enough away that I couldn't see details clearly, but close enough that I could tell it was human-shaped. It wasn't crouched or hiding behind anything. It was just there at the end of the hall. I called out, "I found you." The words barely left my mouth before the figure disappeared. Not stepped back, not turned a corner. It vanished, like it was never there at all. Fear hit me instantly, the kind of fear that doesn't give you time to reason. 1 second, you're playing a game. The next, your body knows something is wrong before your mind can catch up. My chest tightened, and my skin felt hot and cold at the same time. I didn't stay to investigate. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could toward the exit of the building, my footsteps pounding loudly in the narrow halls. As I was running, I heard something that made my blood feel like ice. A voice was yelling my name. It wasn't distant, it wasn't faint. It sounded close, urgent, and angry. At the same time, I could hear footsteps behind me running. I didn't turn around. Every instinct in me screamed not to look. I ran harder, lungs burning, heart hammering so loud I thought it might drown out everything else. The exit felt too far away. The halls felt longer than they had when I walked in. I burst out of the building and into the open air. I spun around, scanning the area wildly, expecting to see one of my friends chasing me, laughing, and telling me it was a joke. But there was no one there. The space behind me was empty. I started running again, this time toward where I thought my friends were. I was yelling their names, panic creeping into my voice. My legs felt shaky, like they might give out, but I didn't stop. Then I found them. They were grouped together, confused, looking around like they were trying to figure out what was going on. The moment they saw my face, they knew something was wrong. I must have looked terrified. I turned around to show them where I had come from. That's when we all saw it. The figure was there again. It stood at a distance, partially obscured by headstones and shadows, but it was unmistakable, human-shaped, dark, still, watching us. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. I wanted proof. I wanted to know I wasn't imagining this. I pulled my phone out, and that's when I noticed something that made the situation feel even worse. My phone had been at 100%. Now it was at 5%. I didn't have time to think about how that was possible. I hit record anyway, desperate to capture something, anything. The screen felt dim. The battery warning flashed. The moment I started recording, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It ran straight toward us. Everything after that happened fast and slow at the same time. We screamed and ran toward my car, tripping over uneven ground, not caring where we stepped, as long as it was away from whatever was coming at us. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of movement behind us was enough. We reached the car, threw ourselves inside, slammed the doors, and locked them. I started the engine with shaking hands and pulled away as fast as I could. Only when we were driving did we finally start breathing again. No one spoke at first. Then everyone started talking at once. What did you see? Did you hear that? Did you hear it say your name? Did you see it run? We were all scared, all trying to make sense of what had just happened. No one laughed. No one joked. The game was forgotten completely. We went straight to my house. We sat there for a long time afterward, replaying everything. The shadow, the figure, the voice, the battery draining, the way it charged at us. None of it made sense. We tried to explain it away. Maybe someone was messing with us. Maybe there was someone else in the cemetery. But none of those explanations fit everything we had experienced. About a year later, we decided to go back. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or that stupid need to prove to ourselves that we hadn't lost our minds. We told ourselves it would be different. It was daytime. We wouldn't go inside any buildings. We would just drive by. As we were driving toward the cemetery, something happened that made all of us go quiet. A tree fell across the road in front of us. Not a small branch. A full tree, blocking the way. We stopped the car, staring at it. The timing alone felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to go any farther. Then we saw movement in the woods. Not one figure, multiple. Shapes stepping out from between the trees. Dark forms that didn't look right. They didn't move like people walking casually. They moved with purpose, slowly emerging from the woods, like they were responding to our presence. That was enough. We turned around and left. We didn't try again. It has been about 10 years now, and none of us have gone back to that place. We don't talk about it often, but when we do, the details always line up. The same shadow, the same voice, the same figure running toward us, the same feeling of being chased. People don't always believe stories like this. I understand why. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I might not believe it either. But when multiple people see the same thing, hear the same thing, and react the same way, it stops feeling like imagination. What stays with me the most isn't the image of the figure, it's the fear. The pure, instinctive fear that hit before my mind could explain anything. The feeling that something knew I was there, that something responded when I noticed it, that something followed me when I ran. That cemetery taught me something I didn't understand before. Some places aren't empty just because they look empty, and some games aren't just games. Whatever we encountered that day didn't feel playful. It didn't feel curious. It felt angry, aware, and fast. And the fact that it showed itself again a year later, in a different way, only made it worse. We didn't push our luck after that. Some doors, once opened, don't need to be opened again. This is one of those memories that feels half unreal when you look back on it, like your brain still isn't sure how to file it. It happened when I was in 5th grade, back when everything felt bigger and scarier because you didn't yet have adult logic to soften the edges of things. Fear hit harder back then, and once it lodged itself in your mind, it stayed. My school was tiny, I mean really tiny. A public school with maybe 30 kids total. Everyone knew everyone. There were no big hallways or sprawling classrooms. Everything felt close together, familiar and predictable. That's part of why what happened stood out so much. Nothing strange ever happened there, ever. One of the weirdest features of the school was this old camper van that had been converted into a library. It sounds strange now, but at the time it was just normal. The camper was parked on school property, and inside it were shelves of books, a couple of small tables, and, because space was limited, some musical instruments too. Music classes were taught in there sometimes, so things like drums, tambourines, and other instruments were stored along the walls. It was cramped, but kind of cozy. At least it was supposed to be. One day, a few of my friends and I were inside the camper van library. There was no adult with us at the time, which wasn't unusual back then. Teachers trusted us. It was a small school, and kids were given a lot of freedom. Someone suggested we play Charlie Charlie. At the time, that game was everywhere. Everyone had heard of it. Everyone knew someone who claimed it worked. You'd draw the little grid, balance the pencils, ask questions, and watch the pencil move. Even if you didn't fully believe it, there was still that nervous excitement. The what if. We didn't think it through. We were kids, bored, curious, and surrounded by books and silence. It felt like the perfect place to do something spooky. We started the game. At first, nothing happened. We laughed nervously, whispering even though there was no rule saying we had to. The camper van was quiet, except for the creak of the floor and the sound of us shifting our weight. Then, out of nowhere, instruments fell. Not one, multiple. They didn't just slide or tip over gently. They fell hard, loud, metal clanging against the floor, wood knocking into shelves. The noise was sudden and violent enough that all of us jumped at the same time. Our laughter stopped instantly. Before we could even process that, books started falling off the shelves. Not a single book slipping. Several books thudding onto the floor, pages splaying open, some sliding across the narrow aisle of the camper. It felt like the space itself had turned against us, like everything that could move decided to move all at once. That alone would have been terrifying. But it didn't stop there. At that exact moment, the fire alarm went off. A real fire drill. The alarm blared loudly, cutting through the chaos, making everything feel even more unreal. Red lights flashing, that shrill sound filling the air. We had no way of knowing at the time that there was a small fire in the kitchen. All we knew was that we were in a cramped camper van, surrounded by fallen instruments and books, right after doing something we weren't supposed to be doing, and now the whole school was screaming at us to get out. It was too much. We ran. We didn't try to clean anything up. We didn't try to explain what happened. We bolted out of the camper van and joined the rest of the school evacuating. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might come out of my chest. Everything felt loud, fast, and wrong. Outside, while we were lined up, whispering frantically to each other, teachers were already on edge because of the fire. When they later went into the camper van and saw the mess, that was it. After that day, no kids were allowed in the camper library without an adult. Not ever. And honestly, none of us wanted to be. The place felt different after that, even during the day, even when the sun was out. Just looking at the camper made my stomach twist. It no longer felt cozy or fun. It felt heavy, like something had happened there that shouldn't have. Not long after, things got even stranger. Kids started saying they saw things in the library windows, not vague shadows, not reflections, shapes, figures, movement where there shouldn't have been any. At first, people brushed it off as kids being dramatic, feeding off each other's fear. That would have been easy to accept. Except it wasn't just kids. Teachers saw it too. That's the part that sealed it for everyone. When adults who had no reason to play along started quietly admitting they'd seen movement in the windows when no one was inside, the atmosphere changed completely. No one joked about it anymore. No one tried to debunk it out loud. The camper library stayed closed most of the time after that. And then summer came. By the time the next school year started, everything seemed normal again. No more falling objects, and no more sightings in the windows. No more stories whispered between classes. It was like whatever had been there simply stopped. That whole thing happened during the summer of 2016. Sometimes I think about how strange that is, how something so intense, so scary, can just end without explanation. No answers, no closure, just silence. People might say it was coincidence, old shelves, an unstable camper, kids bumping things without realizing it, a perfectly timed fire drill, overactive imaginations feeding off fear. Maybe, but when you're a kid standing in a narrow camper van, watching instruments crash to the floor, books fly off shelves, and alarms start screaming right after you do something that already makes you uneasy, logic doesn't really matter. What matters is how it felt, and it felt wrong. That experience stuck with me in a way a lot of childhood scares didn't. It wasn't a nightmare, it wasn't a rumor. It was something that happened in real life, in a place that was supposed to be safe, with witnesses who all remember it the same way. I still don't like cramped spaces filled with old objects, and I definitely don't mess around with things meant to invite something in. As for my summer of 2016, I spent it trying not to think about what might have been in that camper van. How was yours? This happened in my hometown, in a place where people generally felt safe. The kind of town where you recognize faces at the grocery store, where kids grow up together, where families are known by reputation more than by rumor. That sense of familiarity is what makes this story so hard to process, even years later. When I was in school, there were identical twins who attended for a short time. They weren't particularly popular or unpopular, just normal kids, polite, quiet, easy enough to get along with. They didn't cause trouble, didn't stand out in any extreme way. If you asked someone to describe them, they'd probably shrug and say they seemed fine. Their parents seemed fine too. From the outside, their family looked stable. Their parents appeared happily married. No public fighting, no obvious dysfunction. No whispers that something was wrong. They were the kind of family people pointed to when they talked about normalcy. Nothing about them raised red flags, at least not to anyone who didn't live behind their front door. Then one day, everything shattered. Their father snapped. That's the only way people ever describe it, because there isn't a clean explanation for what he did. No gradual public unraveling, no visible warning signs that anyone in town recognized beforehand. One day he was just another father. The next, he was a monster. He went to a gas station with a gun, not far from where people lived, not in some isolated place, just a normal gas station where someone was working a normal shift, expecting nothing worse than rude customers or a long day. He killed the owner, who was working as the cashier, shot her and left her there, behind the counter where she fell. What he did next is the part that still turns my stomach. Right there, beside the body of the woman he had just killed, he assaulted her teenage daughter, a child, a girl whose life was violently destroyed in seconds. The brutality of it wasn't just physical. It was psychological in a way that's hard to even put into words. The cruelty of doing that to someone while their mother lay dead nearby is something most people can't comprehend, because it goes beyond violence and into something far darker. After that, he took the money and ran. He didn't stay to face what he had done. He didn't turn himself in. He fled. He disappeared from town, leaving behind a wake of devastation that would never truly heal. For a while, no one knew where he was. There were police everywhere. Fear spread quickly. Parents locked doors tighter. People watched strangers more closely. The idea that someone capable of that level of violence had been part of the community made everyone uneasy. He made it about a week. They eventually caught him around 400 miles away, hiding out in the mountains. By then, the story had already traveled far beyond our town. It was on the news. People from other places talked about it with shock and disbelief. For us, though, it was personal. This wasn't just a headline. This was someone we had seen at school events. Someone whose kids had sat in classrooms with us. I think about the twins sometimes. What it must have been like for them to wake up one day and find out their father wasn't just gone, but had committed something so horrific that his name would forever be associated with pure evil. How do you carry that as a child? How do you live a normal life knowing what the world knows about your parent? They didn't choose him, they didn't create him, and yet his actions would follow them forever. I think about the daughter at the gas station even more. She survived, but survival isn't the same as being okay. Her entire world was torn apart in a way that no amount of time can truly undo. Losing a parent violently is already unimaginable. Having that loss intertwined with trauma inflicted by the same person is something no one should ever have to endure. I don't know how her life unfolded after that, but I hope she found support, safety, and some measure of peace, even if peace never looks the same afterward. And I think about how deceptive normal can be. That's the part that stays with me the most. From the outside, nothing about that man screamed danger. He had a family, a job, a place in the community. People trusted him enough not to fear him. Whatever darkness existed inside him was hidden well enough that no one saw it until it exploded in the worst way possible. Stories like this change how you see the world. They teach you that evil doesn't always announce itself, that it doesn't always look chaotic or unstable. Sometimes it wears the mask of an ordinary life, waiting for a moment when something inside breaks. That knowledge is unsettling because it means there are things you can't predict or prevent just by being careful. It also leaves behind a strange kind of grief, not just for the victims, but for the innocence of a community that believed it was safe in a simple, uncomplicated way. After something like that, safety feels more fragile. The trust feels more conditional. You realize that some horrors don't come from strangers passing through, but from people who were already there. Even now, when I think back on my hometown, this story sits there quietly among the memories of school, friends, and growing up. It doesn't erase the good memories, but it stains them slightly, reminding me that the worst things sometimes happen right next to the most ordinary ones. Some stories don't need to be widely seen to matter. They matter because they're real, and because they remind us, in the most painful way possible, of how much damage one person can do when something inside them breaks beyond repair. I live next to a house that has been part of my family for as long as I can remember. It's over 50 years old, and for most of its life, it belonged to my grandparents. Even now, my sister lives there, so the house has never really left our family. It has always been familiar, always present, sitting quietly like it has nothing to hide. Growing up, it was just the old house, the place where birthdays happened, the place where holidays felt warm and loud, the place where my grandparents lived when I was young. But as I got older, I started to understand that the house carried a history far heavier than I ever realized as a child. My grandparents lived there around 20 to 30 years ago, long before my sister moved in. Back then, I was too young to think about the past of buildings. A house was just a house. Walls, doors, windows. Somewhere you slept, ate, laughed. I never wondered what might have happened there before my family moved in. Most kids don't. It wasn't until I was older that my grandpa told me the truth. He told me that 3 people had died in that house. I remember exactly where we were when he said it. We weren't sitting around a campfire or telling ghost stories. It wasn't dramatic. It came out casually, like he was talking about old plumbing problems or the way the roof used to leak. That made it worse somehow. There was no build-up, no warning, just a simple statement that completely changed how I saw that place forever. The first death was a baby. My grandpa wasn't sure if the baby was a boy or a girl. What he did know was how it happened. The baby drowned in the bathtub. An accident, at least on the surface. That alone is horrifying enough. Especially when you imagine how small and helpless a baby is. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest feel tight. The idea of something so innocent dying in such a quiet, domestic place feels deeply wrong. But it didn't end there. After the baby died, the mother couldn't live with it. The grief destroyed her. According to my grandpa, she ended up killing herself downstairs in the house. She hung herself. I don't know exactly where, and I've never asked for more details. I don't think I could handle hearing them. Just knowing it happened in that same house, under the same roof, is enough. And then there was the third death. Someone was murdered in front of the back door. They were killed with a hammer. That detail is what stuck with me the most. A hammer isn't distant. It isn't impersonal. It's something you find in a toolbox. Something meant to build or fix things. The thought of it being used to kill someone right there by the back door is something my brain still struggles to fully accept. At first, I wondered if my grandpa might be exaggerating. Not because I thought he would lie, but because stories can change over time. Details get added, memories blur, but then I started hearing the same story from other people. Not just 1 or 2. 6 different people told me the same thing. Different relatives, family, friends. People who had no reason to make something like that up. The details stayed consistent. The baby, the mother, the murder by the back door. Every time I heard it again, it felt more real, more solid, harder to ignore. There was no denying it anymore. Those things really happened, and they happened in that house. The same house where my sister now lives. The same house I walk past all the time. The same house that once felt completely normal to me. Once you know something like that, you can't unknow it. Every time I look at the house now, I think about what it must have been like back then. I think about the bathtub, the stairs, the back door. I imagine moments frozen in time, moments no one should ever have to experience. It changes the way the walls feel, even from the outside. The house doesn't look different, but it feels different. What makes it worse is that there have been things that can't be easily explained. A few years ago, my auntie took a photo inside the house. She wasn't trying to capture anything strange. It wasn't a ghost hunting situation. She didn't take the picture as a joke or a challenge. It was just a normal photo, but taken without any special thought behind it. Later, when she looked at the picture, she noticed something on the ceiling. A red face, not a reflection, not a shadow, not a trick of light. A face floating on the ceiling, red in color, clear enough that you could make out features, eyes, a shape, something that looked like it was watching. When she showed it to the family, no one laughed. There was an immediate shift in the room. The kind of silence that happens when people don't know what to say, but know they shouldn't joke. The photo didn't feel fake. It didn't feel staged. It didn't feel like one of those blurry images where you have to squint and convince yourself something is there. It was obvious. I got to see the picture myself. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. My brain kept trying to explain it away. Maybe it was paint. Maybe it was lighting. Maybe it was a camera error. But none of those explanations fit. The shape was too deliberate, too face-like, too present. And the worst part was the feeling it gave me. There was something deeply unsettling about it. Not in a dramatic jump scare way. It was quiet dread. The kind that sits in your stomach and doesn't move. The kind that makes you feel like you're being observed, even though you're just looking at a photo. After that, I couldn't see the house the same way again. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way the house always seemed darker inside, even during the day. The way certain rooms felt heavier than others. The way silence lingered longer there, like sound didn't want to move. Nothing extreme ever happened to me personally. No voices calling my name, no doors slamming, no shadows running across rooms. And somehow, that almost makes it worse, because it means the house doesn't need to be loud to be unsettling. It just exists with its history, quietly, patiently. Sometimes I wonder if the people who died there left something behind. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in a more subtle sense. Like emotions soaked into the walls. Grief, fear, violence, despair. Those things don't just disappear, especially not when they happen in places meant to be safe. I think about the mother the most. Losing a child is something no one should have to endure. I can't imagine the pain she must have felt, waking up every day in the same house where it happened, walking past the same bathroom, hearing echoes of memories she couldn't escape. It makes sense in a tragic way that she couldn't go on. Then I think about the person killed by the back door. I imagine how sudden it must have been, how unexpected, how close to freedom they might have been, standing near a door only for everything to end right there. And then there's the baby, the quietest death, the one with no understanding, no awareness, no chance to fight back. Sometimes I wonder if the red face in the photo belongs to one of them, or if it's something else entirely. Something drawn to the pain that happened there. Something that feeds on places where suffering was deep enough to leave a mark. Living near that house has changed the way I think about buildings, about history, about how little we really know about the places we feel safest. A house can look warm and familiar on the outside and still hold things inside that never truly rest. My sister lives there now, and I worry sometimes, not because anything bad has happened to her, but because of what I know, because of what the house has already seen, because of the photo, because of the stories that never change, no matter who tells them. I don't tell many people about it, not because I'm afraid they won't believe me, but because saying it out loud makes it feel closer, more real. And once someone hears it, they look at the house differently too. The scariest part of all of this isn't the idea of ghosts or faces on ceilings. It's the fact that everything I've heard lines up. The stories, the history, the photo. None of it contradicts itself. None of it feels exaggerated. It all fits together too cleanly, like pieces of a puzzle that were never meant to be assembled. That house has lived many lives. Some of them ended badly. And whatever remains there doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to move or speak or scare people on purpose. It only needs to exist quietly, knowing what it has already witnessed, and knowing that it remembers. This happened a couple of winters ago, back when I was living in a city that had a big college scene. The kind of place where weekends were loud, crowded, and almost built around parties. If you lived there, you got used to seeing groups of students moving from house to house on Friday and Saturday nights, bundled up in winter coats, laughing, shouting, sometimes already drunk before the night really even started. It was normal, almost expected. That's part of what makes this story so heavy. Nothing about it felt unusual until it was already too late. It was a weekend night, deep into winter, the kind of cold that cuts through everything. Snow had been piling up for days, and by that point, there was around 18 inches on the ground. Not fluffy snow either. Heavy, packed down, icy in places. The temperature that night was brutal. Around 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of cold where your breath hurts your lungs and your fingers start going numb within minutes if you don't have gloves on. A group of college kids had been out party hopping. Nothing out of the ordinary. One house, then another. Drinks everywhere, music loud, people packed into rooms that were too small. Everyone drinking too much, everyone assuming they were fine because everyone else was doing the same thing. That false sense of safety that comes with being in a group. One of the guys in the group, we'll call him Guy 1, was especially drunk. Not just buzzed or sloppy, but absolutely hammered. The kind of drunk where your judgment is already gone, but you still think you're in control. The kind of drunk where simple decisions start turning into dangerous ones without you realizing it. At some point during the night, Guy 1 decided he needed to take a leak. Instead of going inside the house or asking someone to come with him, he stepped outside on his own. That alone wasn't unusual. People did that all the time, especially when houses were crowded or bathrooms were occupied. No one thought much of it. While he was outside, he got a text message. Someone from another party was telling him to come over to a different spot. Another house, another group, another round of drinks. He replied that he was on his way. Here's the part that mattered most. He didn't tell the people he was with what he was doing. He didn't say, "Hey, I'm heading out." He didn't ask anyone to come with him. He didn't make sure anyone knew where he was going. He just assumed he could handle it. So he took off on his own, in the middle of the night. Completely drunk, in freezing temperatures with deep snow everywhere. Instead of sticking to the main streets or sidewalks, he cut through backyards, probably to save time. Probably because drunk logic told him it was faster. Backyard fences were buried in snow. Paths weren't clear. Everything looked the same in the dark. Snowbanks hid uneven ground, ice, holes, and obstacles you wouldn't notice sober, let alone drunk. He was trudging through snow that went nearly up to his knees. Every step would have taken effort. Every step would have soaked his shoes and pants. Snow would have packed into his clothes, melting slightly from body heat, then freezing again. His coordination would have been terrible. His balance shot. His reaction time slow. At some point, he slipped. Maybe he hit ice. Maybe his foot got caught on something hidden under the snow. Maybe he was just too drunk to keep himself upright. Whatever the reason, he went down in someone's backyard. And he didn't get back up, he passed out. That's the part that's hardest to wrap your head around. Because when people hear passed out, they imagine sleep, rest, something temporary. But in conditions like that, passing out is deadly. Alcohol already lowers your body's ability to regulate temperature. It dulls the signals that tell you you're cold, that something is wrong. It makes you feel warm when you're actually losing heat rapidly. Lying in the snow at 10 degrees, soaked, motionless, his body didn't stand a chance. Hypothermia sets in faster than most people realize. Your muscles stop responding. Your brain slows down. Confusion turns into unconsciousness. Your heart rate drops. Once you're out, there's no fighting it. He froze to death there, alone in the dark, in someone's backyard. The next day came. People woke up late, hungover, piecing together the night before. Texts started flying. People asking who had gone where, who stayed over, who made it home. At first, no one panicked. That's normal too. In college towns, it's common for people to crash on random couches, floors, or end up at someone else's place without telling anyone. But then hours passed. No one had seen Guy 1. They started texting him directly. No response. They texted other friends, checked group chats, asked around at the parties they had been at the night before. Slowly, concern turned into real worry. By that afternoon, the truth came out. Someone found him. He had been lying there since the night before. By the time he was discovered, he was already gone. The shock of it hit the entire community hard. Not just his friends, but the whole city. Stories like this spread fast in college towns. One minute, it's just another weekend. The next, there's a name, a face, a tragedy everyone is talking about. What makes this story especially painful is how avoidable it was. If he had told his friends where he was going, if someone had gone with him, if he had stayed on the main road, if he hadn't been so drunk, if the temperature hadn't been so low. So many small ifs stacked together, and yet none of those ifs seemed important in the moment. That's how nights like this happen. No one thinks they're making a life-ending decision. They think they're just stepping outside, just heading to another party, just cutting through a yard. No one thinks, this is how I die. But cold doesn't care about intention. Alcohol doesn't care about experience. Snow doesn't care how old you are or how many friends you have. This wasn't someone doing something extreme or reckless on purpose. He wasn't climbing buildings or picking fights. He was doing something thousands of college kids do every winter weekend across the country, walking between parties, drunk, confident, unaware. That's why this story sticks with people. It's not a cautionary tale that feels distant or dramatic. It's ordinary. Too ordinary, the kind of thing that could happen to almost anyone under the right conditions. People like to imagine that freezing to death is loud or obvious, that someone would be screaming for help, banging on doors, making noise. But hypothermia often looks quiet. Someone lies down, just for a minute. Someone closes their eyes. Someone thinks they'll rest and then keep going. They don't wake up. I've heard people describe this death as peaceful, but that doesn't make it less tragic. Peaceful doesn't mean painless. Peaceful doesn't mean fair. It just means silent. What happened to Guy 1 shook a lot of people out of their routines. For a while after, parties felt different. People checked on each other more. Friends walked each other home. There was more hesitation before someone wandered off alone. But time passes. People forget. New students arrive. Old students graduate. The story turns into something people vaguely remember, then something they heard about, then something that happened a while back. The lessons fade faster than the pain ever should. For the people who knew him, though, it never really fades. They're left with questions they'll never get answers to. Did he realize he was in trouble? Did he try to stand up? Did he feel scared? Did he think about calling someone? Or did the cold and the alcohol take that away? before he had the chance. They're also left with guilt, even though it isn't fair. Why didn't we notice he was gone sooner? Why didn't we stop him from leaving alone? Why didn't we walk him home? Those questions can haunt people for years. This story isn't scary in a supernatural way. It's scary because it's real. It's scary because it shows how thin the line is between a normal night and a fatal one. How the combination of alcohol, weather, and isolation can be deadly without anyone intending harm. It's a reminder that winter is unforgiving, that alcohol lies to you, that being young doesn't make you invincible. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous situations don't look dangerous at all. They look like snow, like a shortcut, like just one more party. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already over. That's what makes it so tragic. A drunk college kid didn't wake up the next morning, not because of violence, not because of an accident with a car, not because of something dramatic or malicious, but because he lay down in the cold and never stood up again. And that's something a lot of people still think about when winter comes back around. Pardon the brief pause in our journey. If this is your first time listening, I'm glad you found us. If you want to keep these rainy nights and calm stories going, please subscribe to Shadow Archives. Think of it as keeping the lights low and the stories moving. Make sure to tap the bell so you never miss a moment of the dark. And now, let's return to where we left off. That New Year's Eve started out like any other celebration meant to close one year and welcome the next. There was nothing unusual about the plan. My wife and I had gone out to dinner with another couple we were close friends with. The idea was simple and pleasant. Good food, a few cocktails, light conversation, and then maybe heading somewhere else afterward to ring in the new year. One of those nights you expect to be easy, forgettable, in the best way. The restaurant was busy but not chaotic. That comfortable kind of crowded where every table is full, voices blend together into a low hum, and the staff is moving quickly but confidently. There was laughter everywhere. Glasses clinking, the sound of plates being set down, music playing softly in the background. Everyone seemed relaxed, leaning into the idea that something new was about to begin. We were sitting at our table enjoying appetizers and cocktails. The drinks had loosened everyone up just enough. Conversation flowed easily. We were talking about the year that was ending, the usual mix of complaints and highlights. Work stories, travel plans, jokes that weren't especially funny but felt funnier because it was New Year's Eve. It felt safe, normal, exactly how the night was supposed to go. And then everything changed in an instant. The scream came from the kitchen. It wasn't just loud. It wasn't just surprising. It was a sound that went straight through you. A scream so raw and full of pain that it instantly shut down every other sound in the room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Chairs scraped the floor as people turned toward the noise without even thinking. It was, without exaggeration, blood-curdling. For a split second, no one knew what to do. The scream didn't sound like an argument or someone being startled. It sounded like something was seriously, terribly wrong. Then people started shouting. Someone yelled for a doctor. Someone else shouted to call an ambulance. The calm, controlled atmosphere of the restaurant collapsed almost immediately into confusion and fear. You could feel it spread through the room like a wave. Our table went completely silent. My wife's face drained of color. One of our friends put a hand over her mouth. The laughter and lightness from just moments earlier felt like it belonged to another world entirely. Suddenly, we were all sitting very still, listening, yet trying to understand what was happening behind those closed kitchen doors. More shouting followed. The scream turned into sounds of agony, the kind that don't fade quickly. The staff moved differently now, no longer focused on service but on urgency. One server rushed past us with wide eyes. Another stood frozen near the bar, clutching a tray like she didn't know where to put it. Time stretched in a strange way. Eventually, word made its way out. One of the cooks had been badly injured. From what we were told later, he had accidentally dumped hot fryer oil all over himself. I never found out the exact details, and honestly, I didn't want to. Someone mentioned he might have been filtering the oil, a routine task in most kitchens, something done countless times without incident. Somehow something went horribly wrong. The oil was still at extreme temperatures. When it hit him, it caused severe burns. Even just hearing that made my stomach turn. I've never worked in a kitchen, but I know enough to understand how dangerous hot oil is. It's not like boiling water, which is bad enough. Oil clings. It sticks to skin. It keeps burning. The pain doesn't stop just because the initial contact ends. Thinking about that alone made my chest feel tight. The restaurant was thrown into chaos. Some people stood up, unsure whether to leave or stay. Others sat in stunned silence. A few diners tried to help, pushing toward the kitchen before being stopped by staff. Someone was on the phone with emergency services. You could hear the panic in their voice even from a distance. The smell in the air changed too. It's hard to explain, but when something goes wrong like that, the atmosphere shifts. The warm, inviting smell of food was replaced by something sharper, more metallic. Fear has a smell to it. Even if you can't describe it properly, the entire place felt wrong. Eventually, the screaming faded, replaced by quieter sounds. Not relief, but exhaustion. Pain that had burned itself into something deeper and steadier. When the ambulance finally arrived, its presence felt surreal. Red and blue lights flashing outside a place where minutes earlier, people had been sipping cocktails and laughing about resolutions they would probably break. The injured cook was taken away. We never saw him. Just the aftermath. The shaken staff. The stunned faces. The awkward silence that followed once the immediate emergency passed. The restaurant tried to resume service, but it was impossible. No one could pretend anymore. No one was hungry. Needless to say, it put a damper on the evening. That feels like an understatement now, but it's the only phrase that fits. The rest of the night felt hollow. We paid our bill quietly and left. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, grounding in a way the restaurant no longer was. Fireworks could be heard in the distance. People were cheering somewhere nearby, counting down hours early, celebrating. It felt wrong. The contrast stuck with me. The way joy and pain can exist so close together, separated only by a wall. One moment you're thinking about the next year of your life. The next, you're reminded how fragile everything really is. Later that night, after we got home, the image wouldn't leave my mind. I kept thinking about that scream, about the cook, whose New Year's Eve would forever be marked by unimaginable pain instead of celebration, about how random it all was. One wrong movement, one accident, a life changed instantly. I mentioned it to a friend a few days later, still unsettled by it. He listened quietly and then told me a story of his own. He said he once witnessed something that had stuck with him in a similar way. He had been stopped at a traffic light, just another ordinary moment on an ordinary day. Cars lined up, engines idling, nothing unusual. Ahead of him was a convertible with the top down. Someone inside, enjoying the weather, probably thinking about anything but danger. Next to the convertible was a truck carrying hot tar. My friend said he didn't know exactly how it happened. Maybe a latch failed. Maybe the driver hit the brakes too hard. Maybe it was just terrible luck. But suddenly the truck dumped its contents. Hot tar poured out. It went straight into the convertible. The image alone made me feel sick. Tar isn't just hot. It's thick, heavy, sticky like oil, but worse. It clings. It doesn't come off easily. It continues burning long after contact. My friend said the sound that followed was something he would never forget. Screaming, chaos, people jumping out of their cars, not knowing how to help. Traffic accidents are common. We hear about them all the time. But something about that story felt different. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't metal twisting or glass shattering. It was another moment where heat, routine, and terrible timing came together to create instant horror. Listening to him, I realized why these stories stay with us. They aren't about monsters or violence in the way we usually think of it. There's no villain, no intention, just ordinary situations turning catastrophic in seconds. A kitchen task, a truck at a stoplight, things people do every day without thinking twice. That's what makes them so unsettling. You don't expect danger at a dinner table. You don't expect it at a red light. You don't expect it while doing a job you've probably done hundreds of times before. And yet, it's there, waiting for the smallest mistake, the tiniest failure, the worst possible timing. Since that New Year's Eve, I've found myself thinking differently about moments like that. About the people working behind the scenes while others celebrate. About how thin the line is between a normal night and a nightmare. About how screams can cut through joy so quickly that it almost feels unreal afterward. I still think about the cook sometimes. I wonder how long his recovery took. I wonder if he still works in kitchens. I wonder if New Year's Eve still carries that memory for him the way it does for me, even though our experiences of that night were worlds apart. That night taught me something I didn't expect to learn over cocktails and appetizers. Life doesn't always wait for the right moment to fall apart. Sometimes it happens in the middle of laughter, in the background of celebration, right when you're convinced everything is fine. And once you've heard a scream like that, once you've felt the air change in a room full of strangers, you don't forget it. It stays with you, quietly reminding you how fast everything can change. I was very young, around 4 or 5 years old, so this memory exists in that strange place between clarity and blur. I don't remember every detail of that day, but I remember the feeling of it with absolute certainty. Some moments from childhood fade completely, but others stay sharp in a way that doesn't make sense for how small you were at the time. This is one of those moments. My parents were standing downstairs talking about something. I don't remember what they were discussing, and at that age I didn't really care. I was just there, half listening, half lost in my own thoughts the way little kids are. The house had 2 floors, and everything felt normal, safe, ordinary. There was no fear in the air, no tension, nothing that suggested what I was about to see would happen. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. I had never seen a skeleton before, not in real life, not in pictures, not in books. I didn't even know what they were called. I had no concept of anatomy or bones arranged into a human shape. That's one of the reasons this memory has always bothered me so much. There was nothing in my experience that should have prepared my brain to invent something like this. It looked wrong in a way that's hard to explain, almost like it didn't belong in the house, like it had been dropped into reality from somewhere else. The closest comparison I can make now is that it looked like something cut out of a badly edited image, like a figure pasted into the scene where it didn't quite fit. Flat in some places, too sharp in others. Unnatural. I watched as it ran upstairs. Not slowly, not floating, it ran. It moved from my parents' room to the spare room where we kept storage, moving fast, like it knew exactly where it was going. I didn't see it for long, just long enough for my brain to register what I was looking at and for fear to explode inside me. I remember the sound of movement more than footsteps, like a rush of motion rather than something solid hitting the floor. I reacted on pure instinct. I'm Latin, and without thinking, without planning, I blurted out "Huesudo." which in Spanish would roughly translate to something like bony or skeleton. It wasn't a word I consciously chose. It just came out of me, like my body recognized what I was seeing before my mind could catch up. After that, everything collapsed into fear. I don't remember screaming, but I remember panic. I remember running. I remember wanting to be as close to my parents as possible, because suddenly the house didn't feel safe anymore. Whatever I had seen had shattered that feeling completely. The upstairs, especially, felt wrong after that, like something had claimed it. From that day on, I couldn't sleep alone. I slept in my parents' bed until I was 10 or 11 years old. That's a long time for a kid to cling to that kind of safety, and it wasn't because I was spoiled or dramatic. I was genuinely terrified. Nighttime became something I dreaded. The dark wasn't just dark anymore. It felt populated, like things could move inside it when I wasn't looking. Even when nothing happened, the fear stayed. As I grew older, something else followed me too. Dreams. I always struggled with strange, vivid dreams, and one in particular came back again and again. In this dream, a skeleton would appear and start pulling me through what looked like a tunnel. The tunnel wasn't made of stone or dirt. It was abstract, warped, like the inside of something organic and endless at the same time. There was no clear beginning or end, just movement, darkness, and that same bony figure dragging me forward. The dreams didn't feel symbolic at the time. They felt real, physical. I would wake up shaken, sometimes sweating, sometimes crying, my heart racing like I had been running. Even after waking up, the image would stick with me, lingering behind my eyes. As I got older, I tried to explain it away. Kids have imaginations. Kids see things. Kids dream weird dreams. That's what people say, and logically, it makes sense. But there's always been a part of me that hesitates to fully accept that explanation. Not because I want it to be something supernatural, but because of how specific it was, how consistent, how it appeared before I had the language or exposure to create it intentionally. What disturbs me most isn't just the image of the skeleton, it's the timing, the fact that I saw it before I understood what it was, the fact that it moved with purpose, the fact that the fear didn't fade with time, but rooted itself deep enough to change how I slept for years. That experience shaped my relationship with the dark, with dreams, with the idea of being alone in a space. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes get that same tight feeling in my chest. When I think about it, the sense that something crossed a line that day, that my childhood sense of safety cracked earlier than it should have. I don't claim to know what it was. I don't say it was a ghost or something paranormal with certainty. I also don't think it was just nothing. It was real enough to me in that moment to leave scars that lasted years. Real enough to follow me into my dreams. Real enough to keep me clinging to my parents at night, long after most kids had grown out of that phase. Some childhood fears fade as you grow up. This one never fully did. It softened, sure. It became something I could talk about instead of something that ruled me. But it never disappeared. It lives in memory, in dreams, in that strange space where logic and instinct don't fully agree. And even now, when I think back to that house, to the stairs, to the upstairs rooms, I can still picture it running, from one room to the other, like it had always been there, like it knew exactly where it was going, and like I was never meant to see it at all. There are some deaths that don't just make the news and then fade away. They stay with you. They sit in your mind long after you've read the article or heard the story, not because they were shocking in a sensational way, but because they were so completely unnecessary. The death of Kim Jong-kyun is one of those cases. It is the kind of story that forces you to confront how fragile life can be when systems fail, and how often those failures are quietly accepted until someone dies. Kim Yong-kyun was a young subcontracted worker at the Taean power plant in South Korea. He was not a manager. He was not a decision maker. He was one of the people at the very bottom of the chain, tasked with doing dangerous, dirty, physically demanding work so that others could benefit from cheaper contracts and lower costs. His job involved inspecting coal conveyor belts, massive pieces of industrial machinery designed to move huge amounts of coal through the plant. This was not safe work. Everyone who worked there knew it wasn't safe. The conveyor belts were powerful enough to drag a human body into the machinery. Accidents had happened before. Close calls were common. The risk was not theoretical. It was known, discussed, and feared. That is why the job was supposed to be done by two people, not one. When done properly, one worker would inspect the belt while the other stood ready to pull an emergency cord if something went wrong. That cord would shut down the system immediately, stopping the belt and potentially saving a life. But that night, Kim was alone. He was working overnight, inspecting the conveyor belts during the quietest hours, day when fewer people were around and fewer eyes were watching. His company had underbid for the contract, meaning they offered to do the work more cheaply than others. One of the ways they cut costs was by reducing staffing. Two people became one. Safety became optional. Risk became part of the job description. Late that night, Kim was pulled into the machinery. There was no one there to pull the emergency cord, no one to hear him, no one to stop the belt. The machine did exactly what it was designed to do without regard for the human body caught inside it. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was far too late. His body was found 4 hours later, still inside the machinery, mangled beyond recognition. He had been decapitated, even writing that feels wrong because it reduces a human life to a mechanical outcome. But that is exactly what happened. A person became an afterthought in a system that valued efficiency over safety. What makes Kim's death even harder to process is how openly preventable it was. One of his co-workers explained it in painfully simple terms. The conveyor belt is so powerful that people are sometimes sucked into it. That danger is well known. That is why workers are supposed to operate in pairs. When there are two people, one can pull the safety cord and stop the belt. The only reason Kim was alone was because his employer chose to save money. That's it. No freak accident, no unforeseeable malfunction, no unavoidable tragedy, just a decision made somewhere higher up the chain that one person was enough, even when everyone knew it wasn't. And Kim did not die because the technology was too advanced, or because the risk was misunderstood. He died because someone calculated that the odds of disaster were low enough to ignore, and because the person taking the risk would not be the one paying the price if something went wrong. The cruelty of that kind of calculation is hard to overstate. What adds another layer of tragedy is who Kim Yong-kyun was as a person. He was not ignorant of the risks. He was not complacent. In fact, months before his death, he had been actively involved in a movement demanding an end to subcontracting for dangerous work. He knew exactly how unfair and unsafe the system was. He knew that irregular workers, subcontracted workers, were being placed in harm's way while companies insulated themselves from responsibility. There is a photograph of him from that time holding a sign at a protest. The words on it are devastating in hindsight. He was calling on President Moon Jae-in to meet with irregular workers. He was demanding an end to unfair labor laws. He was demanding punishment for those responsible for illegal dispatches. He was demanding that irregular workers be given regular status by being hired directly. He was asking, clearly and publicly, for the exact changes that could have saved his life. Months later, he was dead because those changes never came. There is something profoundly disturbing about that. A man warning the world about a danger, advocating for reform, and then being killed by the very system he was trying to change. It feels almost symbolic, like a cruel punctuation mark at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish reading. After his death, public outrage in South Korea was intense. People didn't just see an industrial accident. They saw a failure of labor protections, a failure of oversight, and a failure of political will. Kim's face became known across the country. His name became associated with a broader conversation about subcontracting, irregular workers, and how easily companies avoid accountability by outsourcing the most dangerous tasks. But outrage, as powerful as it is, comes after the fact. Kim never got to see whether the attention would lead to real change. He never got to benefit from the reforms he fought for. His family never got to see him come home from that shift. The system responded only once it had already taken his life. That's what makes stories like this linger. It forces you to confront how often safety exists only on paper. How often rules are written, acknowledged, and then quietly ignored when they become inconvenient. How often the people who suffer the consequences are those with the least power to refuse unsafe work. Kim was young. He had a future. He had beliefs. He had the courage to speak up in a society where irregular workers are often expected to stay silent. And yet, when he clocked in that night, none of that protected him. What also stays with me is the image of his body being found hours later. 4 hours is a long time. It means the machinery kept running. It means the night shift continued. It means the system carried on as if nothing had happened, because no one was there to notice that someone was missing. There is something deeply unsettling about that kind of absence, about how a human being can disappear into a machine without immediately stopping it. It raises uncomfortable questions. How many other workers are alone right now, performing tasks that should never be done solo? How many companies are saving money in ways that put lives at risk? How many warning signs are being ignored because nothing bad has happened yet? And how many tragedies are waiting for the right moment to occur? Kim's death also highlights the unique vulnerability of subcontracted workers. When companies outsource dangerous tasks, they create layers of distance between decision makers and consequences. Responsibility becomes diluted. When something goes wrong, blame can be shifted. Paperwork can be rearranged. Apologies can be issued without meaningful accountability. The person who dies, however, is always the one closest to the machine. That reality is not limited to South Korea. It exists everywhere. Construction sites, factories, mines, power plants, anywhere profit margins and human labor intersect, there is pressure to cut corners. Kim's story resonates globally because it reflects a universal pattern. The names change, the locations change, the machinery changes, but the logic stays the same. Work faster, work cheaper, take the risk, and when someone dies, call it an accident. But accidents imply randomness. What happened to Kim Yong-kyun was not random. It was the predictable outcome of a known hazard combined with a cost-cutting decision. Calling it an accident feels like another way of avoiding responsibility. What makes his story especially haunting is that he understood this better than most. He wasn't naive. He wasn't unaware. He was actively resisting the conditions that would eventually kill him. That awareness doesn't make his death less tragic. It makes it more painful. It's impossible not to imagine what his final moments might have been like. Alone in the dark, performing routine inspections, probably thinking about getting through the shift and going home. The sudden violence of the machinery, the shock, the helplessness, the knowledge that the safety system existed but couldn't be activated because no one else was there. That kind of fear is difficult to comprehend. His death forces us to confront how easily society accepts these outcomes as the cost of doing business. News articles move on, public attention shifts, another tragedy replaces it. But for the families left behind, And for workers still doing the same jobs under similar conditions, nothing really ends. The photograph of Kim holding that protest sign feels like a message from the past, a warning that went unheeded, a reminder that labor rights are not abstract concepts or political talking points. They are literally about who lives and who dies. When people say that regulations are burdensome or that safety measures are too expensive, Kim's story stands as a counterargument written in blood. The cost of safety is always less than the cost of losing a human life, even if that cost doesn't show up neatly on a balance sheet. This is why his death affected me so deeply. It wasn't just tragic, it was instructive in the worst possible way. It showed how systems fail not through malice alone, but through indifference, through the normalization of risk, through the quiet acceptance that some lives are more expendable than others. Kim Jong-kyun should still be alive. He should be working under safer conditions, or better yet, not forced to risk his life to keep a power plant running. He should have seen the reforms he demanded. He should have been protected by the very safeguards that existed but were denied to him. Instead, he became a symbol. And while symbols can inspire change, they are always created at an unbearable cost. His story stays with me because it reminds me that progress often comes too late for the people who need it most. That justice, when it arrives after death, feels hollow. And that behind every statistic about workplace fatalities is a real person who knew the risks, spoke out, and was still sent into danger alone. That is not fate, that is a choice. And it's one we keep making over and over again, until another name joins the list of those we say should not have died. Kim Jong-kyun is one of those names, and remembering him means refusing to accept that his death was inevitable, or acceptable, or anything less than a profound failure of the system that was supposed to protect him. The memory of that night in the woods is something that has stayed with me for years, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow that refuses to fade when the lights are turned on. I was only in the 6th grade at the time, an age where you feel like you are on the cusp of adulthood, but are still very much a child who is afraid of the dark. We were at an overnight camp, a sprawling facility tucked away deep in the mountains, surrounded by miles of dense, untouched forest. It was the kind of place that looked beautiful in the brochures, with sparkling lakes and log cabins, but took on a sinister, isolated feeling once the sun went down. The camp was known for its strict rules and organized activities, but there was one event that everyone whispered about. It was a special night hike, an exclusive privilege reserved only for the good kids. The counselors called it the Midnight Walk, though it usually happened around 9 or 10 at night. Only the campers who had followed every rule, kept their cabins spotless, and participated in every activity without complaint were invited. It was treated as a badge of honor. When my friends and I were tapped on the shoulder during dinner and told we had been selected, we were ecstatic. We felt special, chosen. We happily agreed, imagining a fun, slightly spooky adventure where we might see an owl or maybe a deer. We had no idea that we were signing up for a trauma that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. We finished our dinner quickly, buzzing with excitement, and rushed back to our cabins to grab our flashlights and hoodies, ready for the adventure. When we arrived at the meeting point near the edge of the forest, the air was already turning cold. The group consisted of about 20 of us, all roughly the same age, all eager to prove how brave we were. We stood in a loose circle, chatting and laughing, our flashlight beams cutting through the gathering mist. Then our instructor arrived. I won't use his real name, but let's call him Mr. Henderson. He was usually a loud, energetic guy, the kind of counselor who led the camp songs and was always smiling. But that night he looked different. He looked terrible. His skin was pale, almost gray, as if the blood had been drained from his face. His eyes were wide and darting around nervously, and he was sweating despite the chill in the air. He looked like he had just seen a ghost, or perhaps something even worse. At the time, being a naive sixth grader, I dismissed his strange appearance. I rationalized it in my head. I thought maybe he was just stressed out about leading a large group of kids into the woods at night. Maybe he was worried we would wander off or get hurt and he would get in trouble. I told myself he was just taking his job very seriously. He didn't say a word of greeting to us. He just did a quick head count, his lips moving silently as he pointed a shaking finger at each of us. Once he was satisfied that we were all there, he turned abruptly and began to walk into the tree line. We grabbed our gear and followed him, falling into a line like little ducklings, trusting him completely to keep us safe. As we walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to shift. The sounds of the camp, the laughter from the mess hall, the distant splashing in the lake faded away until they were replaced by the heavy, oppressive silence of the woods. The trees here were ancient and tall, their branches weaving together overhead to block out the moonlight. It was dark, a thick, inky blackness that seemed to press in on us from all sides. Our flashlights felt weak against the overwhelming dark. Mr. Henderson was walking fast, much faster than the usual hiking pace. We had to jog slightly to keep up with him. He wasn't talking to us, wasn't pointing out constellations or animal tracks like the other counselors did. He was just marching forward, his eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. After walking for what felt like 20 minutes, Mr. Henderson started acting even stranger. He began to look around wildly, spinning in circles as if he had lost his sense of direction. He would stop abruptly, stare into the dense underbrush for a long moment, and then take off in a different direction. A ripple of unease went through the group. We looked at each other, our excitement turning into anxiety. One of the bolder kids, a boy named Tyler, spoke up. He asked the question we were all thinking. He asked if we were lost. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at him. He just barked a sharp, aggressive no and kept walking. We continued to follow, but the formation was breaking. We were huddled closer together now, sensing that something was wrong. Another 10 minutes passed, and by now the forest was completely unrecognizable. We were off the main trail, pushing through ferns and stepping over rotting logs. It was getting really dark, and the air felt heavy and stagnant. I checked my watch and realized we had been walking for a long time. I was one of the taller kids, and I felt a sense of responsibility, so I decided to speak up. I jogged up to the front of the line, keeping a safe distance from Mr. Henderson's back. I asked him if we were going back soon because it was getting really dark and hard to see. I tried to sound polite, but I think my fear leaked into my voice. Mr. Henderson stopped dead in his tracks. He stood there for a second, his shoulders heaving as if he were hyperventilating. Then he whipped around to face us. His face was twisted in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was pure, unhinged madness. He screamed at us, his voice cracking and echoing through the silent trees. He yelled that we were not going back. He screamed that he was tired of this place, tired of the camp, tired of everything. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He screamed that he wanted his parents to think it was all their fault for him losing 20 children. He said they should be blamed, that they deserved the pain of knowing their son had led 20 kids into the void. Everyone froze. We were just kids, 12 years old, standing in the dark woods with a grown man who had just admitted he planned to lose us on purpose to spite his parents. We looked at each other, mouths open, thinking, what is wrong with this guy? Is he okay? Is this some kind of sick, twisted campfire story come to life? Before we could process the threat, Mr. Henderson turned around and started running. He didn't just walk away, he bolted. He sprinted deeper into the forest, crashing through the bushes, running away from the camp and away from safety. Panic erupted in the group. Some of the smaller kids started crying immediately. Others just stood there, paralyzed by shock. Me and my friends, who were the tallest and most athletic of the group, made a split-second decision. We couldn't let him leave us here. He was the only one who knew the way back, or at least, he was the adult responsible for us. We told the others to stay exactly where they were, to huddle together and keep their flashlights on. We told them we would bring him back. They agreed, terrified to move, so me and two of my friends took off, sprinting into the darkness after him. We ran as fast as we could, dodging low-hanging branches and jumping over roots. We could hear him ahead of us, the sound of breaking twigs and heavy footsteps guiding us. We ran for what felt like a mile, our lungs burning, the adrenaline pumping through our veins. Finally, we saw a shape ahead of us. We slowed down, catching our breath, creeping forward. We had caught up to him. He was crouched near the base of a massive oak tree, his back to us. He was rocking back and forth, mumbling to himself in a low, frantic whisper. I approached him slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at him for scaring us, but mostly I just wanted him to take us home. I reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. I expected him to jump, maybe to yell at me again. The figure stopped rocking. Slowly, very slowly, he stood up and turned around. The beam of my flashlight hit his face, and I screamed. It wasn't our instructor. It looked like him, wearing the same camp t-shirt and the same shorts. But it wasn't him. The face that looked back at me was a nightmare. It was gaunt and skeletal, the skin pulled tight over the skull like he had been starved for weeks. His eyes were sunken deep into his sockets, dark pits that seemed to hold no light. His mouth hung open in a silent, impossible grin, revealing teeth that looked too long. He stared at us with a hunger that was palpable. It was a doppelganger, a mimic, something that had worn the shape of Mr. Henderson but got the details wrong. We didn't wait to ask questions. We didn't wait to see what it would do. We turned and ran. We ran faster than we had ever run in our lives, screaming at the top of our lungs. The terror was absolute. We didn't look back to see if the thing was chasing us. We just needed to get back to the other kids. We scrambled back through the woods, tearing our clothes on thorns, tripping over roots, but scrambling back up instantly. We saw the lights of the other kids' flashlights in the distance and pushed ourselves harder. Just as we were getting close to the group, one of my friends, Sarah, tripped violently. She went down hard, hitting the ground with a thud. I skidded to a stop and whipped around to help her up, terrified that the starving thing had caught her. I shone my light down to see what she had tripped over. My breath caught in my throat. She hadn't tripped over a root or a rock. She had tripped over a body. I moved the light closer. It was Mr. Henderson, the real Mr. Henderson. He was lying face down on the forest floor, unconscious. He looked peaceful, almost, compared to the thing we had just seen. But this made no sense. We had just chased him a mile in the other direction. We had just seen him crouching by the tree. How could he be here, passed out on the trail, when we had just seen him running ahead of us? Confusion warred with fear, but anger won out. I was terrified, but I was also furious at the situation. I needed an adult, and this was the only one we had. I reached down and slapped him hard across the face. I yelled at him to get up. I grabbed his shirt and shook him, screaming that he had to wake up and take us back. He groaned, and his eyes fluttered open. He looked dazed, confused. He looked at us like he didn't know where he was or how he got there. He sat up, rubbing his head, looking around at the dark woods with genuine fear. He didn't remember running. He didn't remember the screaming. He just seemed groggy. But we didn't care about his excuses. We forced him to stand up. We supported him, practically dragging him back to the group of crying children. We didn't tell the other kids what we had seen. We just told them we found him and he had fallen. We navigated our way back to the main trail, mostly by luck and by following the distant glow of the camp lights. The walk back was silent and terrifying. Every rustle in the bushes made me flinch, expecting to see that sunken, starving face peering out at us. When we finally burst back into the camp, it was chaos. The parents of the good kids were waiting, wondering why the hike had taken so long. We told the head counselor everything, or at least the parts that made sense. We told them Mr. Henderson had snapped, screamed at us, ran off. And then we found him passed out. Mr. Henderson was fired immediately. There was a huge investigation. He was sent to some kind of mental asylum or psychiatric hospital, I guess. The camp tried to hush it up, saying he had a nervous breakdown due to stress. But nobody believed us about the other part. Nobody believed us when we told them about the thing by the tree. They said it was just shadows, or our imagination, or that in the dark, the fear made Mr. Henderson look different. They said we couldn't have chased him and found him behind us at the same time. They told us it was impossible. But I know what I saw. I know my friends saw it too. We saw a creature that was wearing our instructor's skin, waiting in the dark to lure 20 children away. The real Mr. Henderson had passed out or been knocked out, and something else had tried to take his place. To this day, I can't go into the woods at night. I still see those sunken eyes in my nightmares, and I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run away. Where I come from, the picket fences aren't there to keep dogs in. They are there to mark the invisible territory between a normal life and a very violent, abrupt death. To an outsider, my neighborhood looks like any other suburban sprawl. We have paved roads, stray cats that wander through gardens, and ice cream trucks that play that distorted, tinny music in the humid afternoons. But if you look closer, if you really pay attention to the rhythm of the streets, you realize that the silence here is heavy. It is a silence born of fear and necessary ignorance. In my part of the world, it is not just common for your neighbors to be Mexican drug dealers or affiliated with a high-profile cartel. It is practically a demographic certainty. You learn very quickly that the nice guy washing his truck a Sunday might be a middle manager for an organization that dissolves people in acid barrels on Monday. Growing up here, you develop a sixth sense. You learn to read the signs that someone isn't just a businessman with a good commute. You notice the brand new SUVs with tinted windows that are so dark you can't see a silhouette inside. You notice that certain houses have security cameras pointed not at their front door to stop package thieves, but at the street, covering every angle of approach. You notice that these neighbors never seem to have a regular schedule, yet they always have money for renovations, new rims, and lavish parties where the music thumps until 4 in the morning. And you learn the most important rule of all. You never, ever complain. You don't call the police for a noise complaint. You don't ask them what they do for a living. You smile, you wave, and you keep walking. I have witnessed things that would make someone from a quiet town in the Midwest pack their bags and run without looking back. I have seen homes in my neighborhood raided, and the terrifying thing is that you never know who is doing the raiding until the dust settles. Sometimes it is the federal police wearing tactical gear, smashing in doors with battering rams at 3 in the morning. Those are the loud nights. You hear the shouting, the sirens, the barking of dogs, and sometimes the sharp pop of gunfire. You lie in your bed, staring at the ceiling, praying that a stray bullet doesn't punch through your drywall. You hope that the raid is successful and that the people next door are taken away in handcuffs, because the alternative is much worse. The alternative is when the raid isn't official. Sometimes the trucks that pull up aren't marked police vehicles. They are just convoys of heavy-duty trucks, filled with men wearing tactical vests, but no badges. These are the rivals. These are the enforcement squads from opposing cartels coming to clear out the competition. When that happens, you don't hear sirens. You hear automatic gunfire, the screeching of tires, and screams that haunt you for the rest of your life. I have watched from behind drawn curtains as a house 3 doors down was turned into a slaughterhouse because the people living there missed a payment or encroached on the wrong territory. The next morning, the police arrived to tape it off, acting like they arrived too late, but we all know the truth. In this ecosystem, survival is about looking the other way. I personally know friends who have been kidnapped and extorted. It is an industry here as common as selling used cars. There was a guy I grew up with, let's call him Mateo. Mateo was a good kid, not involved in the life at all. He was going to university, studying architecture. His only mistake was that his father owned a successful chain of hardware stores. In the eyes of the cartel, that didn't make them a respectable business family. It made them a piggy bank waiting to be cracked open. Mateo was taken right off the street in broad daylight. He was walking to his car after class, and a van just pulled up. 2 guys grabbed him, threw him in, and he was gone in 10 seconds. The weeks that followed were a nightmare for his family. I remember sitting in their living room, the curtains drawn, the phone sitting on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to go off. The kidnappers demanded an exorbitant amount of money. They sent proof of life that I wish I could forget. Photos sent to his mother's phone showing Mateo bruised and terrified, holding a newspaper to prove the date. His family had to liquidate everything. They sold the business, they sold their cars, they borrowed money from everyone they knew. They paid the ransom. Mateo came back, but he wasn't the same. He was hollowed out. He flinched at loud noises. He couldn't sleep with the lights off. He eventually moved away to a different country, but the trauma is something you can't pack in a suitcase. Obviously, there is a saying that goes, "Play crazy games, you win crazy prizes." This usually refers to the people who choose to enter the life, the low-level dealers, the lookouts, the drivers. When something happens to them, there is a lack of sympathy from the general public because they signed up for the risk. They wanted the fast money, the power, and the status, and the price of that is often their life or their freedom. Unfortunately, that comes with the territory. But the terrifying reality of living here is that wrong place, wrong time is very real. You don't have to be a player to win the prize. You just have to be standing next to one. This brings me to the story that specifically haunts me, the event that made me realize just how thin the line is between observer and victim. It happened 2 summers ago. The house directly across the street from mine had been vacant for a long time. It was a nice 2-story house with a high wall around the front yard. One day the sold sign went up, and within a week, new neighbors moved in. They seemed quiet. It was a couple, maybe in their 30s, with no kids. The man was always dressed immaculately, usually in button-down shirts and slacks, even in the heat. The woman was beautiful, always wearing sunglasses and designer clothes. They drove a brand new white luxury SUV. We did the neighborly thing. My mom baked a cake and we went over to welcome them. They were polite but distant. The man introduced himself as Luis. He said he was in import-export. That is the standard code. It means everything and nothing. We left the cake, made small talk about the garbage pickup schedule, and went back home. For months, things were fine. Luis would wave when he pulled out of the driveway. They kept their yard manicured. They were the perfect neighbors because they were quiet. But then the signs started to appear. It started with the traffic. Late at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, different cars would pull into their driveway. They wouldn't stay long. Someone would run inside, stay for 5 minutes, and leave. Then the security started to ramp up. I noticed Luis had installed cameras on every corner of the house. He raised the height of the front wall by another 2 feet, adding decorative spikes that looked nice but were clearly meant to stop someone from climbing over. One afternoon, I was washing my car in the driveway, and I saw Luis come out to check his mail. As he bent down, his shirt rode up, and I saw the distinct handle of a pistol tucked into his waistband at the small of his back. It wasn't a holster for a concealed carry permit. It was tucked in casually, like a tool he needed to have on him, just to walk to the mailbox. We stopped waving after that. We stopped looking at their house. We adopted the survival strategy, invisibility. But the tension in the air was palpable. You could feel that the heat was turning up. One night, I woke up to the sound of arguing across the street. It was loud, aggressive shouting in Spanish. I peeked through the blinds. There were 2 trucks parked on the street, blocking Luis's driveway. Men were standing outside, arguing with Luis at his gate. I couldn't make out the words, but the body language was violent. Luis was gesturing wildly. The men were standing with their hands on their hips, near their waistbands. After 10 minutes, they spat on the ground, got in their trucks, and sped off. That was the warning. I told my parents we should go stay with my aunt in the next town over for a few days. But my father is stubborn. He said we had done nothing wrong, so we had nothing to fear. He believed that the violence only touched those involved. He was wrong. The wrong place, wrong time factor doesn't care about your innocence. It only cares about your proximity. 3 nights later, hell broke loose. It was a Tuesday. A completely mundane Tuesday. I was up late watching movies. My parents were asleep. The street was dead silent. Then a low rumble started. It wasn't the sound of a single car. It was the sound of a convoy. I went to the window. 4 black pickup trucks were rolling down the street with their lights off. They were moving slowly, like sharks in dark water. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew instinctively that they were coming for the house across the street. They stopped in front of Luis's house. The doors opened in unison, and at least 15 men poured out. They were dressed in black tactical gear, wearing balaclavas. They carried long rifles, AR-15s and AK-47s. This wasn't a police raid. There were no sirens, no megaphones shouting, "Police, open up!" This was a hit squad. They moved with terrifying efficiency. 2 men ran to the gate and slapped something onto the lock. A second later, a small explosion flashed and the gate swung open. I dropped to the floor, crawling to the corner of the window to peek out without being seen. I should have looked away. I should have hidden in the bathtub, but curiosity is a fatal flaw. I watched as they stormed the front door. They didn't bother knocking. They used a battering ram, and within seconds, they were inside. The silence of the night was shattered by the sound of fully automatic gunfire. It was deafening. It sounded like a war zone had erupted 30 feet from my bedroom. I could hear glass shattering, wood splintering and shouting. I heard Luis screaming, then the screaming stopped abruptly. The woman started screaming next. It was a high, piercing sound that cut through the gunfire. I dialed the emergency number on my phone, my hands shaking so hard I dropped it twice. The operator told me that units were already dispatched, that they had received multiple calls. They told me to stay away from the windows and stay low, but I couldn't stop watching. The gunfire inside the house stopped. Now, the men were coming out. They were dragging something. They were dragging Luis. He was alive, but barely. He was zip-tied and bleeding heavily from his leg. They threw him into the back of one of the trucks like a sack of cement. Then they brought the woman out. She wasn't injured, but she was hysterical. They threw her in the truck too. This is where the wrong place, wrong time reality hit. Just as the men were loading up to leave, a car turned onto our street. It was just a regular sedan, probably a teenager coming home late or someone working a night shift. The driver saw the blockade of trucks and the armed men and panicked. Instead of stopping or reversing slowly, the driver slammed on the brakes and tried to do a U-turn. The screech of the tires drew the attention of the gunmen. They didn't hesitate. They didn't check to see who it was. They just opened fire. 3 of the men raised their rifles and unleashed a wall of lead at the sedan. The windshield disintegrated. The car spun out of control and crashed into a parked car on the side of the road. The horn started blaring, a long, continuous note that signaled the driver was slumped over the steering wheel. The gunmen didn't even check the car. They jumped into their trucks and sped away, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had arrived. The whole ordeal had taken less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to destroy a home, kidnap 2 people, and murder a stranger who just happened to turn down the wrong street. I waited until the sirens were close before I ran outside. My parents were awake now, huddled in the hallway, terrified. I ran to the sedan that had crashed. The neighbor from 2 doors down was already there. He was an older man, a retired doctor. He was checking the pulse of the driver. I looked inside. It was a young guy, maybe 20 years old. He was wearing a fast food uniform. He was just a kid coming home from a late shift at a burger joint. He had been shot multiple times in the chest and neck. He was dead before his car even hit the curb. The police arrived and taped everything off. They raided Luis's house afterwards, or what was left of it. They found kilos of cocaine and stacks of cash hidden in the walls. They confirmed that Luis was a high-ranking accountant for the cartel and that he had been skimming money. That was why the hit was so brutal. The rival cartel, or maybe his own cartel cleaning house, had come to collect him and the money. The aftermath was almost as scary as the event itself. The next day, the neighborhood was swarming with reporters and investigators, but the residents, we said nothing. When the news crews tried to interview us, we closed our doors. When the police asked for witness statements, people suddenly developed amnesia. I was asleep, everyone said. I didn't see anything. We knew that if we spoke, if we identified anyone or gave details that could lead back to the shooters, the trucks would come back, and this time they would stop at our houses. The fear of being the next collateral damage keeps everyone silent. The family of the boy in the sedan, the fast food worker, put up a small cross where his car had crashed. His mother came by every day for a month to light candles. It was heartbreaking to watch. Her son hadn't played any crazy games. He hadn't tried to extort anyone or sell drugs. He had just taken a left turn instead of a right turn. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and in my neighborhood, the penalty for that is death. Luis and his wife were never found. They became just 2 more statistics in the long list of disappeared persons. The house across the street sat empty for a year. The bullet holes in the stucco patched up, but still visible if you knew where to look. Eventually, it was sold again. A new family moved in. They have young kids. They put up a swing set in the front yard. I watch them sometimes from my window. I see the father mowing the lawn, waving to the neighbors. I wonder if they know who lived there before. I wonder if they know that the master bedroom was the site of a kidnapping. I wonder if they know that the stain on the street where their kids ride bikes is where a young boy bled out for no reason. I still live here because leaving isn't easy. Moving requires money and resources that not everyone has. So we stay. We reinforce our locks. We mind our own business. We learn to sleep through the distant sound of sirens. But I never look at the neighbors the same way anymore. When I see a new car, I check the windows. When I see a group of men standing outside, I check their waistbands. The scariest part isn't the violence itself. You almost get used to that. The scariest part is the randomness of it. You can follow all the rules, keep your head down and stay out of trouble, but you are sharing a zip code with monsters. And when the monsters decide to fight, they don't care who gets stepped on. We are all just potential collateral damage, living on borrowed time in a neighborhood where the person waving at you might be the reason you don't wake up tomorrow. That is the reality of where I'm from, and it is a terrifying game of roulette that we play every single day. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you.